Great. So everyone should have gotten that notification. And I will be sharing my screen now. Beautiful. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Diana Vasquez. I'm the BERDO Review Board Manager. The BERDO Review Board does not currently have an appointed chair, so I will lead us in a vote for acting chair. Does anyone on the board want to make a nomination for acting chair at this moment?
I move that we appoint Lee Matsueda as acting chair.
Beautiful. Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Awesome. And I will now do a vote roll call style. Board Member Boyd, how do you vote?
In favor.
Board Member Ellis?
In favor.
Board Member Jacobs?
Aye.
I don't believe Councilor Lara is with us right now. Board Member Matsueda?
In favor.
Board Member Nelson?
In favor.
And Board Member O'Malley?
Aye.
Awesome. In that case, the motion passes, and I will hand the meeting over to Acting Chair Matsueda.
All right, thanks everyone, and good afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and call this public hearing to order. It is 4:36 p.m. And in accordance with the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances Section 7-2.2. The BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing at 4:30 p.m. on October 2nd to review the following topics in regards to the reduction of greenhouse gases from building energy production and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we're conducting this public meeting online. And to ensure public access to the deliberations of the BERDO Review Board, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. And to do so, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. And if you're calling in and you can't use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. You can also send your questions to staff via email at BERDOReviewBoard, all one word, at boston.gov. So for the record, I am Lee Matsueda, acting chair of the board. I'll now conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, just please say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
I am Board Member Rashida Boyd.
Board Member Stephen Ellis.
Board Member Lavette Jacobs.
No, should I go board member Lee Matsueda?
Board Member Matt O'Malley.
And we also have Jack with us, right?
Sorry, yes. Jack Nelson.
All right, great. Thank you. I think that's all, everyone that's here with us for today. And now we're going to have staff go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Diana Vasquez with the Environment Department.
Claudia Diaz Martinez, Environment Department.
Aladdin Joroff, Environment Department.
Fantastic. Great. And so yeah, let's take a look at our agenda for today's meeting. We're going to go ahead and start as we usually do with our approval of our meeting minutes from our last meeting. Environment staff are then going to go ahead and provide an overview of some of the feedback we received during the public comment period on building portfolios and individual compliance schedules, as well as an update following the APCC hearing. They'll also provide an overview on feedback received during the informal comment period on hardship compliance plans and the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. and an update also following the APCC hearing. So staff will then propose some next steps, and we'll wrap up as we usually do with some administrative updates and adjourn. So I hope that sounds good to everyone. Thanks staff for all the work you're doing to get us ready for these meetings, and for members of the board members for joining us, and then members of the public obviously also for joining us. All right, so if there isn't anything, we're going to go ahead and go to our first item to approve our last meeting minutes. So these are from September 11th. Before we actually take a motion, I guess, are there just any edits or questions, comments about these meeting minutes? For members of the board? Okay. Or staff? If not, then is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I approve.
Thanks for the motion.
Second.
Is there a second? Thank you for the second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any abstain? Any opposed who say nay? Okay, so the board member meeting minutes have been approved unanimously. Thank you. And again, that will be entered into the public record and available online. Excellent. So let's go on to agenda item number 2. This is the update regarding the BERDO Phase 3 regulations development. We're going to get an update on building portfolios, individual compliance schedules, as well as hardship compliance plans and equitable emissions investment fund. I think the way we're going to do this too is we'll give the board a chance in between. We'll do them in sets of 2, a chance to just provide question and comments after we present on building portfolios and individual compliance schedules, as well as the hardship compliance plans and equitable emissions and investment fund. And at the very end, of course, as we always do, we'll make sure to retain space for members of the public to ask questions and comments. So make comments. So yeah, members of the public, please be patient with us. There's going to be a lot of content here, but we will be sure to take your questions and comments at the end of this agenda item. So if that sounds good, I'm going to hand it over to you, Diana.
Great, thank you. So just to kick us off, just a reminder that we are in phase 3 of regulations development. And today we're going to talk more specifically about building portfolios, individual compliance schedules, hardship compliance plans, and the equitable emissions investment fund. These are just phase 3 progress and activities that have been completed thus far. The only thing I would like to note on this slide is that we're holding our next community advisory group meeting next week on October 10th, 2023. And since our last meeting, we also have held a community focus group on the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So there's only 2 new updates from our last meeting on September 11. And then here's a summary of feedback received during the second formal comment period regarding building portfolios and the individual compliance schedules regulation language. So we received letters. Oh, I should mention the public comment period closed on Friday, September 15th at noon. And we received letters from A Better City, Conference of Boston Teaching Hospitals, Green Ribbon Commission Higher Education Working Group, Longwood Collective, and Longwood Medical Energy Collaborative. So it's some of the main themes in the formal comment period that we received for both building portfolios and individual compliance schedules. We received comments seeking more details regarding appeals following a review board decision, requests for the city to make and share draft standard application forms for review, and then seeking more clarity on the review board's options to terminate versus amend an approved building portfolio or individual compliance schedule. For building portfolios specifically, we received feedback that requested to clarify the definition of owner for purposes of building portfolios, requests for the city of Boston to produce a mapping tool for applications in building portfolios that kind of trigger that environmental justice review, and also a request to add a good faith clause when buildings are removed or added from a portfolio with short notice. And then we wanted to offer some clarifications. So regulations clarifying appeals processes will be adopted as part of phase 3, but we anticipate this being part of fines and enforcement. So we anticipate providing drafts in the fall of this year. And the Environment Department is currently developing standard, or actually we released today, standard forms for applying for building portfolios and individual compliance schedules. They're available online at the BERDO Review Board website. We are leaving these open for public input until October 16th. And we just wanted to clarify, because there's been some confusion in the past. The first deadline to apply for either a portfolio or an individual compliance schedule is not until September 1st of 2024, if you would like that to be reflected in 2025. And the environmental justice mapping tool is coming soon. We're currently developing that tool with our internal team. And now I will hand it over to Claudia to specifically go over the revisions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I'm gonna present the minor revisions that we did on draft language for building portfolios and individual compliance schedules based on the feedback we received on the last public comment period. These regulations have been adopted by the Air Pollution Control Commission last week. So this content was presented already in the last Air Pollution Control Commission hearing last Wednesday. So today I will highlight just those minor changes. So here you can see the outline or the context of regulations and policies for building portfolios, and in red you can see the specific headings or parts of the regulations that were revised. Next slide, please. Okay, so for building portfolios, our first revision was in the eligibility criteria for building portfolios. Here we made minor revisions to clarify the definition of owner for purposes of building portfolios. These minor revisions are in line to what the ordinance requires for owners for building portfolios, and these just clarified and improved the clarity and legibility of that language, and it didn't change the essence of previous versions of the regulations. Another revision was regarding the requirements for building portfolios. Here we only reclassified 2 eligibility criteria as requirements. Those eligibility criteria were related to that any portfolio that combines buildings that have emission standards starting in 2025 and 2030, that if they put them in a building portfolio prior to 2030, they have to meet all the applicable emission standards. That hasn't changed, we just reorganized it. And then we also clarified the language for the requirement that for any building that has a more stringent or net zero emission standard due to zoning requirements, they will have to meet that building specific emission standard. This is also not changed from previous versions of the regulations, just clarifications. Next slide, please. In the case of modifications of approved building portfolios, as Diana mentioned, we received some comments asking about what would happen in the scenario where buildings are removed from an approved portfolio due to change of ownership or vacancy after September 1st, which is the annual deadline to apply or notice modifications for a portfolio. So here we just clarified what an owner would do in that scenario. It is not a change of the previous versions of the regulations, just a clarification. We also had other general revisions related to formatting and the renumbering of references to other sections in the regulations. Next slide, please. In a similar way, here you can see all the content for the regulations and policies for individual compliance schedules or ICS. And in this case, we only had revisions on one of the sections of the regulation, which is related to eligibility. Next slide, please. In this case, we revised the language on eligibility criteria to allow for building portfolios to have multiple baseline years. This decision was made after the first public comment period. So that has not changed, but we clarified that rather than demonstrated that the building portfolios, GFA has not been reduced by more than 10% from a single baseline year, owners would need to demonstrate that for each building's baseline year. So that was just to allow for that decision in the regulations. And similar in this section for ICS, we also have general formatting improvements and renumbering of references to other sections in the regulations. Next slide, please. Oh. And yeah, as I mentioned, the Air Pollution Control Commission held a special hearing last Wednesday on September 27th. There's a recording of this hearing available on the BERDO regulations website. And at that hearing, the Commission voted to approve regulations for both building portfolios and individual compliance schedules. These adopted regulations can be found on both the regular BERDO website and the BERDO regulations website. And these slides also provide links directly to those documents. And I'll send the link in the chat for the BERDO regulations website. Next slide, please. Yes, so I think that's all for building portfolios and ICS. Happy to take questions from the board.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Claudia and Diana. And yeah, that's exciting stuff that we got through this phase of the work so far. I know there's plenty more to do, but let's go down the list. I'll do like I did last week. Last meeting. I'll go in reverse order, and I'll start with board member O'Malley. Any questions or comments, and then Jack, you'll be next, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, first of all, great work as always, team. And thank you, Claudia, for that detailed overview. I'm referencing slide 15, Roman numeral 20, building portfolios, under letter B, requirements for building portfolios, the second bullet point that has the clarification language around any building in the proposed portfolio that is required to meet a more stringent or net zero emission standard prior to 2050 set through zoning requirements must meet its building specific emission standard every year. That seems intuitive. That seems like a no-brainer. My question is this: is there, and for folks watching, obviously the stretch code, there are other levels that Boston is now taking advantage of, which are even more stringent than BERDO in many ways. Is there a scenario where a new building that would come under the stretch code wouldn't be in compliance with BERDO?
Well, I think under the new stretch code, depending on the pathway that's used, there's still the option to use fossil fuels, even if your building is electric ready.
Like
So there,
10%.
yeah, so there are possibilities. I mean, the hope would be many buildings wouldn't have a significant BERDO compliance option for many years. But there are scenarios where it's possible.
And I'm not a lawyer, I'm sure people much smarter than me included that. I was really more curious, but I guess it makes sense to out of an abundance of caution, just to remove any doubt. So
yeah,
that was my only question. So thank you. That makes sense.
Great, thanks, board member O'Malley. Board member Nelson. I think we can't hear you, Jack. I can't hear you.
Shoot, sorry about that.
There we go.
On the website, are there application templates now available, or is it just the requirements of an application?
And I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
You're back. Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
I can chime in. We have standard forms available for public input. They are, I would say they may change as a result of input that we receive. So we recommend, if possible, to maybe wait until we have a more solidified forms, but I can share the link in the chat so folks can see them.
Okay, so it's an actual template that an owner would utilize to submit to the city.
Correct. Or if they hired a third party.
Right, okay.
Yes, and just to provide context, in a previous round of public comments, there was a request to have draft application forms available for the public to provide feedback. So this is why we're releasing first a draft version of the application form so that people can provide input, and then after that have a formal application form.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Jack. And just to be clear, you said that we're going to be accepting feedback on those until October 15th. Is that correct?
October 16th, Monday.
Great. I know those are, I think, just recently made available, so I have not had a chance to look at those, but I know people have been asking for them. Thank you. I will take a look. I think my only comment or question, I guess, is related. It would be helpful if you could remind me a little bit more about, in my background, I have a lot of work as doing environmental justice work, the EJ mapping tool. Could you just remind me a little bit more about the intent and purpose of the tool?
Sure. So review board members may remember that there's different pathways to apply for building portfolios. One of the pathways have specific steps related to an environmental justice review. So buildings that go through pathway 2 or some buildings that go through pathway 3, for example, would need at the time of application to submit a map that maps their buildings in the building portfolio against different layers with environmental justice criteria. So that included first the definition of environmental justice populations that it's in the ordinance and in the state of Massachusetts. It also includes asthma rates, the air toxic respiratory hazard index, and the urban heat island effect. So we are just producing a single map that has consolidated all of those layers so that building owners wouldn't have to go through 5 different maps for that requirement. And that map would be updated in portfolios emission standards compliance plans once they are approved after 2 years.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I think that's all I have right now. Thanks again for the work, and yeah, glad we got these regs and policies done. Okay. Board member Jacobs. Is she with us?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm still driving, but yeah, I haven't no questions. I'm just following along audibly. I'll take a look at the slides when I have the chance once I get to my house.
Yeah, of course. Drive safe, board member Jacobs, and yeah, when you get a chance, you're welcome to jump in. Board member Ellis.
Yes, thank you. Going back to slide 15, I just want to seek some clarification about what was different before, particularly related to the language that talks about the zoning requirements. And so, Claudia, I know you said there wasn't much changes, but it was just a clarification point. Can you talk a little bit about what that was?
Yeah. Claudia, do you mind if I jump in there? The requirement was there about if there was a more stringent or a net zero emission standard. We just didn't reference zoning directly. And we wanted to make sure we didn't cause any confusion where other requirements could come from, because the ordinance does specifically call out that if zoning sets a different emission standard for a building, that's what shall apply via BERDO. So the essence of the requirement is there. This was a hope to clarify, to make sure people understood where it was coming from.
Thank you, Aladdin.
Yep.
The next question I have is about slide 18. I guess I'm wondering, first off, good work. I'm curious, like, what got us to this point here under section A about moving from the total building, if the building was decreased from the total gross square footage to individual buildings. And I have something floating in my head about why I might see that as potentially difficult, but can you just clarify to me, like, how did you get here?
Go ahead, Claudia, if you want to start.
So Essentially, before in our first version of the regulations, we had said that building portfolios would have a single baseline year.
Mhm.
Based on public feedback, we added that building portfolios could have different baseline years for each of their buildings. Hence, it would be easier to track if there's a change in GFA building by building rather than by the whole building portfolio. That would require an extra layer of tracking for the building owner. And this change for the requirement is just also to enable building portfolios to have multiple baseline years rather than demonstrating everything based on a single baseline year, which wouldn't make sense if they're using different baseline years.
Mhm.
If that makes sense. I don't know if
Yes,
that was a
that-
clear explanation.
No, thank you. That definitely makes sense. I guess I'm curious if certain entities have a cluster of buildings that have one baseline year and another cluster of buildings that have another baseline year. I guess I'm wondering about the workload for you all, particularly. That's a lot of information, and so I guess I'm trying to envision how that shows up on the application template. And so maybe I'll spend some time reading over what it says, but I find myself wondering if that's like an overwhelming amount of information, if we're taking into account, say, 100 buildings that all need to individually show that they did not reduce themselves by 10%. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and I think if I'm not wrong, Diana, correct me, in the draft application forms, we included the link to a template for building owners to input or their buildings in a building portfolio, input their baseline years and calculate the individual compliance schedule based on that data. And the template also determines based on the data that the owner would input, determines if there's not a reduction that is more than 10%, and if there's a change in building use. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but definitely if you have feedback once you have checked the template as well, we would be more than happy to discuss that.
I'll definitely give you a heads up. I'm going to be looking into how parcels are taken into account for this, because I know a building owner can choose to break out their individual buildings upon that parcel. And so that's why I'm worried about like the overwhelming amount of information, but if you all are prepared for it, that's fine by me. I guess I'm more so concerned about the workload of having to go through and verify every single line item there. But I have no more questions at this time.
All right. Thanks, Board Member Ellis. I think that's all the board members we have here today. Any just last comments or questions, board members, before I think I misspoke earlier. We will have a public comment period now, and then we'll go into our next section, and that's what we'll break it up a little bit. But anyway, before we do a public comment section, oh yeah, Board Member Boyd, thank you.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I was going to say you missed me. But no, I don't have anything to say right now. Maybe that's why I wasn't, fanning it too much. But thank you.
Yep. Yeah, the staff got that. Thanks, staff. Any other board members, questions or final comments on this section? All right. If not, I'm gonna go ahead and open the meeting to public comment on this this part. As a reminder to members of the public to provide public comment, you're going to raise your hand or type in the chat via the Zoom meeting platform. And if you're calling in and you can't use that platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. You can also send your questions to staff via email at BERDOreviewboard@boston.gov. We're going to try to limit our comments and questions to 3 minutes, and would ask that members of the public, when you please introduce yourself. If there's an organization, your neighborhood, would love to know what that is. And I will pause and see if any of you have any comments or questions. You're also welcome just to speak up if you can do that. All right, I don't think I'm hearing anything on this. Okay. Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. Well, again, great work on this, staff, and appreciate all the questions, members of the board. I think we are ready to move on to our third agenda item. Or no, second, we're going to continue with this item, aren't we? Sorry, there's more to this. We got feedback we're going to talk about. Sorry. So here we are. We're going to get some on both the hardship compliance plans and the equitable emissions investment fund. I think here is where I was imagining that we would leave some space after we do the hardship compliance plans for any board questions and comments. And then after the equitable emissions fund, we'll do that again, and then we'll close it out with the public comment period. So I will pass it back to staff.
Awesome. I can kick us off here. Quickly just review the feedback we received during the informal public comment period, which also ended on Friday, September 15th at 12 o'clock. We received feedback from the following groups: A Better City, Green Ribbon Commission Cultural Institutions Working Group, Green Ribbon Commission Higher Education Working Group, Institute of Contemporary Art, Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and Vicinity Energy. And some main themes that we received during this informal comment period for hardship compliance plans, specifically a request to expand the list of critical services related to hardship compliance plans, a request to add additional characteristics and circumstances that could create hardship, a request to create a new building use category for cultural institutions, a request to establish a common pathway for cultural institutions for hardship compliance plans, a request to add additional potential application materials to demonstrate hardships, seeking clarity on the frequency with which a hardship compliance plan would need to be filed and updated, and then seeking clarity on the length of time that a hardship compliance plan would cover. In relation to the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund, we received feedback seeking clarification on how the review board will evaluate and prioritize potential projects. We received feedback suggesting to score potential projects according to evaluation criteria, suggesting additional evaluation criteria, seeking clarification on how project deliverables such as emissions reductions are going to be ensured, suggesting the creation of a public project tracker, an independent project review, and third-party audit component paid for by the fund, and suggesting review of other green bank models that are in existence currently. And then just other general comments we received, feedback seeking technical guidance on the best pathway for compliance, and requesting the establishment of a cultural institutions working group. And I now pass it to Claudia.
Hi, everyone. It's me again. I want to highlight a couple of things. So first, as with all previous public comment periods, there is a document with staff responses for each of the letters and comments that we'd received that is already available on the BERDO regulations website. And you can also find all the comment letters in that website. You will also see that a lot of comment letters are related to cultural institutions. So in addition to the responses that staff prepared, we have also reached out to the Green Ribbon Commission's Cultural Institution Working Group to discuss their concerns further. And finally, all the slides will contain practically all the draft regulations language for hardship compliance plans and the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. I presented very detailed, all the details of these in the past special hearing of the Air Pollution and Control Commission. Today, I will walk you through all of this draft language and highlight the key points in each of the slides, but I will not read each specific sentence that is on the slides. But happy to answer any questions that are related to these. So for next slide, please. First of all, a reminder of hardship compliance plans. As you may remember, hardship compliance plans are one of the flexibility mechanisms that are allowed in the ordinance, in addition to building portfolios and individual compliance schedules. Hardship compliance plans allow building owners to receive alternative emissions reduction targets or timelines for compliance. Hardship compliance plans are available for buildings that experience a hardship in complying with BERDO according to the regulations that are being drafted right now. All hardship compliance plans must be approved by the BERDO Review Board, and the Review Board is also able to set conditions of approval on these plans. Next slide, please. And before going deep into the draft language, I want to explain first the logic of how building owners would demonstrate and apply for hardship compliance plans. And you can see here 3 different layers. So the first level or layer is that owners will need to demonstrate that the existence of circumstances and characteristics that could create a hardship. We have categorized the circumstances and characteristics into 4 categories: financial, regulatory or contractual, technical or operational, and other, and I will explain those in following slides. I also want to highlight that policies and guidance will provide details on how to demonstrate each of these circumstances and characteristics. So that is the first layer, the existence of these unique circumstances and characteristics. The second level is that owners would need to confirm eligibility, but demonstrating how, due to those circumstances and characteristics that they have, how compliance with the emission standards would either require space, equipment, or electric service that is not available, significantly interfere with or significantly increase the cost to provide services that are critical to community health and safety, or create an undue burden on a building owner in terms of cost. And I will provide more details on these 3 scenarios as well later. And finally, once the owner has demonstrated both their circumstances and characteristics and how hardship is created, then the owner would request one of 2 types of hardship compliance plans. They could either go for a short-term plan, which would provide relief for 1 to 3 years, or a long-term hardship compliance plan that would provide relief for 4 or more years. So just keep in mind these 2 layers of demonstration as I go into the draft language. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first set of draft language is related to describing each of those 4 categories of circumstances and characteristics that could create hardship. I won't read all of these today, but I do want to highlight some examples for each category. So the first one, regulatory or contractual circumstances and characteristics, could include things like government regulations that affect the minimum energy use for a building, provided that any resulting hardship arises from reducing emissions from such energy use. An example of these could be hospitals that have requirements of levels of temperature, humidity, and ventilation that are required through government regulations. Or it could also be accreditation or certification standards that also impact minimum energy use. An example of these could be all the certifications that are required for museums or aquariums, zoos, and so on. Next slide, please. The next category are financial circumstances and characteristics. An example of these could be owner bankruptcy, for example. Then in technical, an example could be if there are building or site space constraints that limit significant compliance-related work or having high process loads, provided that any resulting hardship arises from reducing emissions from that energy use. And finally, we have a category that provides discretion to the review board to accept other circumstances and characteristics on a case-by-case basis. And we provide as an example any delays in insignificant compliance that are created due to a natural disaster or a declared state of emergency. Next slide, please. The next set of regulations are related to confirming eligibility for a hardship compliance plan. So first, the owners would need to demonstrate that due to unusual circumstances or characteristics, compliance with the emission standards would create any of the scenarios. requiring space, equipment, or electric service that is not available, significantly interfere with or significantly increase the cost to provide services that are critical to community health and safety, including life-saving services, affordable housing, and other services the review board may deem critical on a case-by-case basis. Here we're also providing the review board with discretion to consider other critical services. And finally, create an undue burden on a building portfolio by resulting in costs that would either be significantly higher due to the unusual circumstances or characteristics of the building owner, building, or portfolio, interrupt the financial ability to operate, have a more than merely negligible effect on a state agency's or state-created entity's ability to fulfill an essential government function, or cause other significant effects that the review board determines should be mitigated in light of benefits provided by and or greenhouse gas emissions avoided by the building portfolio or building. Next slide, please. The other eligibility criteria, apart from demonstrated how hardship is created, is that the building or building portfolio does not have an individual compliance schedule or is requesting to replace said ICS. This is because a hardship compliance plan can provide an owner with an alternative schedule compliance that would be almost immediately incompatible with an individual compliance schedule. Because as you may remember, an individual compliance schedule have very strict requirements in terms of absolute emissions reductions by 2030 and by 2050. And finally, the other eligibility criteria is that the building or building portfolio is in compliance with the ordinance and regulations. Next slide, please. Okay, and the next type of regulations are related to the types of relief that owners can request through a hardship compliance plan. So the reviewer may, at its discretion, grant one or more of the following types of reliefs, and any relief can be granted in a long-term or a short-term, but a long-term hardship compliance plan shall be reassessed every 5 years. So the types of reliefs could be either an alternative schedule for complying with the emission standards in the ordinance, so a different emissions reduction schedule than the one that is established by BERDO, alternative emission standards than those in the ordinance, exemptions of specified energy uses in whole or in part, adjusted compliance obligations in light of third-party barriers or delays to significant energy efficiency or electrification projects, and additional compliance mechanisms that the review board determines are consistent with the ordinance, and any other relief that the review board deems appropriate on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. The next set of regulations are related to the application requirements for hardship compliance plans, and the two slides that are next provide all of the information requirements, and I will mention them at a very high level. So first, a description of how the owner has used or plans to use all the different compliance and flexibility mechanisms that are available through BERDO. A description and supporting documentations of the existence of those circumstances and characteristics that could create a hardship. Remember, that's the level 1 of what owners need to demonstrate. And then a description of how, and supporting documentation of how that combination of compliance actions that the owner has considered and the unique circumstances and characteristics that they have create a hardship, and an evaluation of opportunities, feasibility, and cost for any compliance-related work in the building or building portfolio. Next slide, please. The application would also include a description of any significant emissions reduction efforts in the past. It will also include the requested type, scope, and length of relief that the owner is requesting. And for applications for long-term hardship compliance plans that are for building portfolios, a description of how that hardship compliance plan would impact the development and implementation of the emission standard compliance plan, and for applications for long-term hardship compliance plans, the proposed conditions for the approval of the plan that provide benefits to environmental justice populations or advance the purpose of the ordinance. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next set of regulations are related to application fees. First, here I want to highlight that the Environment Department may, at its discretion, waive any application fees due to any financial difficulties from the owner to pay said fee. And the purpose of a hardship compliance plan, if we remember, is to avoid cost in the future due to a future hardship. So it's not necessarily that owners have a hardship in the present, but trying to avoid a hardship in the future. However, recognizing that owners may have financial circumstances and characteristics in the present, application fees could be waived. The application fees that are proposed in these draft regulations are set differently according to the length of the hardship compliance plan. So there's different fees for short-term plans and long-term plans. And then the fees are also different according to whether the application is for an individual building or for a building portfolio. And in the case of long-term hardship compliance plans, also depending on the size of the building itself. And these application funds, as we have mentioned in the past, would be used by the review board at its discretion to secure outside consultants, including engineers, in order to review applications for hardship compliance plans. Next slide, please. The next set of regulations are related to the conditions of approval for plans, in line to what the regulations for building portfolios and ICS have established. The draft language here proposes that the reviewer would set standard conditions for all hardship compliance plans, and these standard conditions would be related to, for example, being in compliance with BERDO in the first place, or reassessing long-term hardship compliance plans every 5 years. And then on a case-by-case basis, the reviewer would also be able to set special conditions that are related to distributing benefits to environmental justice populations and advancing the purpose of the ordinance. And such special conditions would be discussed at a public meeting of the review board. Next slide, please. We also have regulations related to the application process. Here I want to highlight that applications for short-term plans must be submitted at least 6 months before the first year in which the hardship would be effective. Sorry, in which the hardship compliance plan would be effective. And for long-term hardship compliance plans, the application must be submitted at least 12 months in advance. I also want to highlight that applications may be submitted in advance of the start of an anticipated hardship, but the reviewer may prioritize the review of application based on the year of the anticipated hardship. So the reviewer would prioritize applications that are closer to start or are in the near term rather than the long term. And then we specified a timeline for the different steps, similar to what we did for building portfolios and ICS. So when the Environment Department would inform the applicant that their application is complete, when the reviewer shall hold a hearing, when there is a decision, and then when there would be the possibility to have an appeal process. Next slide, please. The next set of regulations are related to modification of hardship compliance plans. Something I want to highlight here is that the review board approval would be required to make any modifications to a plan or to extend the relief granted in a previous plan. And for building portfolios with hardship compliance plans, a building added to the portfolio must meet the emission standard that is required by the ordinance every year, unless the review board approves a modification of the hardship compliance plan. And beginning in 2024, applications to modify the plan must be submitted by September 1st. This is the same deadline and timeline that we set for building portfolios and ICS. Next slide, please. And here, this draft language also establishes different rules of how the reviewer would vote to approve or deny a modification for a hardship compliance plan. And it specifies things like what happens to buildings if they're removed from a hardship compliance plans, what happens if there's a modification to a building portfolio that has a hardship compliance plan. And what I want to highlight here is the last point that says that newly constructed buildings and new buildings for which an owner begins an Article 80 review or applies for a building permit after approval of a long-term hardship compliance plan might not be added to a hardship compliance plan. Next slide, please. And I think this might be the last set of regulations for hardship compliance plans, which are related to termination. And here it also establishes the different scenarios where termination could happen, either by the building owner themselves or by the review board. And then what happens with compliance if hardship compliance plans is terminated. And it also establishes the timeline for this termination process. Next slide, please. Okay.
Great. Wow. Thank you, Claudia, for that. A lot here that I think we're getting into for the maybe, I don't know how much we haven't really talked that much about this. So curious, obviously, we'll take time right now just to see if the board has any specific questions, clarifying questions, comments that they'd like to make. And I'll start with you, board member Boyd, and we'll go down the list. But yeah, any comments or questions, board member Boyd?
No, not right now. I may later, but not right now. Thank you, Lee.
Yep. Board member Ellis.
Yes, thank you. And I want to express appreciation for how far this has come since inception of the hardship compliance plan. There's a lot of detail here, which definitely helps me conceptualize it. My first question is, I have three, so please bear with me for a moment. I'm curious about the relationship with the state agencies and state entities. You had mentioned on slide 32 that, you know, they may have a reason for hardship compliance that, you know, just that they may not be able to fulfill their essential government function. And I just wonder, you know, have you gotten that kind of feedback from the state agencies, or like what's the relationship thus far that could lead to them asking for hardship compliance?
Yeah, so I would say with the new administration at the state, there's definitely been more discussions about BERDO, and a lot of the state buildings are reporting data. So it's ongoing discussions of what that will look like in the future, but we want to make sure we include in the regulations everything we would need now. And so that language just comes from case law about situations where states agencies may be subject to local regulations and what the limits of that could be. So at the moment, we're just working with them on collecting data for a lot of state buildings.
Okay, thank you, Aladdin. My second question is just as a reminder or to clarify, the application fees. I know we talked about this in previous board meetings, that the application fee would not go into the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. Is that still true?
Sorry, that is the current plan, that they would go into a pool specifically for the use of outside consultants or independent consultants to assist the review board. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then my last question is, I'm just curious about the rationale. I think I know the answer, but the rationale where the hardship compliance plan, the application for the hardship compliance plans are different for the short and long term, meaning there's a 6-month application period for the short and 12-month for the long. Again, I'm assuming the rationale so that there's more time to investigate what's going on with the long-term application, but I am wondering, especially with this being the first time everyone is submitting under this plan, if whether or not it might be useful to just have 6 months for both, so that those building owners that need the additional time to understand what they're submitting for don't get penalized for asking for a hardship compliance plan and not being within 12 months.
Well, and because of the reality of where we are, it is going to be a 6-month window for everybody for 2025 because we won't have these regulations ready till approximately the end of the year. And then we don't want people to have to respond within 2 weeks. So for a hardship plan to be effective in 2025, the deadline is July 1st, 2024. After that, we would extend it to the full year and open to feedback though on whether there should be more flexibility there.
Oh, no, I think that's helpful, Aladdin. I guess because I didn't see that on the slide, I wanted to call
It's
it
small
out.
print. Yep.
Okay, no problem. That's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Board Member Ellis. Board Member Jacobs.
No questions for me at the moment.
I don't think Board Member Councilor Lara or Board Member Lattimore are with us, correct? So I think I have, well, one of my questions you kind of spoke to already, Board Member Ellis, about the fees. The second one, I am just trying to wrap my head around processing these applications, right? And it makes me want to know again, I think there was a request earlier about like who in the city has not been filing data, their reports and data, what buildings, what might we actually expect when it comes to who's going to apply for this. And it even makes me think through like scenarios, right? And so anyway, I'm trying to anticipate a little bit of that so I can just more clearly wrap my head around the process and whether or not these draft regulations make sense, which by the way, I'm also very impressed by the level of detail because I was kind of able to follow through most of it. And I was at the stage now where I'm wanting to say, okay, I'm trying to work through some like scenarios about what kind of buildings or building portfolios might come our way that are going to be requesting this type of hardship. And anyway, so that's kind of where my head's at and wanting to get back to like better understanding more about who might apply for this and also where are we at currently with, getting a better idea of the types of buildings that have not been reported.
Yeah, so I can speak to that at a high level and maybe we can come back in more detail later, but I think that's two distinct pieces there of where we're not getting reporting data yet. A lot of those are smaller buildings, so they're newer to BERDO and won't have a compliance obligation until 2030. So it's hard to tell yet if they're going to need hardship early or not. And it's hard for us to assess without their data where they are in meeting their compliance standards. We have done some looking at the data we do have to see which types of buildings we think would need or would not be automatically meeting their compliance obligations in 2025. It doesn't necessarily mean they'd all need hardship because they could make use of other compliance pathways. So I don't have a specific answer. I think we could dig a little more and follow up on what that could look like. And I just want to chat with folks here about how we do that without revealing the identification of a particular building owner as well. But I'm sure we could come back to you with some scenarios of types of properties that look like they're not on track for their 2025 compliance data, because those are ones I would think that are more likely to apply for a hardship compliance plan early.
Great, that's super helpful. Thank you.
And if I can add to that, I think it's implied by what Aladdin said, but hardship may come not only for those that haven't complied with reporting to date, but also from buildings that have already reported. And vice versa. They might not come from buildings that haven't reported. So just to highlight that it's not only buildings that today haven't reported data.
Right. Thank you. Board Member Nelson.
Thank you. Yeah, there's incredible amount of work there. Nice job on that. It's I can definitely comprehend it. So nice work. Now, to review these applications, this is going to be a huge amount of effort there. Is your department setting up a subset of people and professionals who are going to be reviewing this, or is the board responsible for the in-depth review, and then to hire the consultants that may help?
You want me to start? So I think it will be, a combined work that the staff will definitely be supporting the review board. So there's a couple things we will be fleshing out, kind of policy and again, standard application forms, so that we can try to streamline the process too, and have kind of like information to evaluate and think about what are we asking for and what do we need to review it, so that we're developing that capacity as we develop the applications. But that is part of what the application fees are intended for, is if we're particularly for hardships that are based primarily on technical circumstances or characteristics, that might be a place where we would want to hire an outside, expert to help with the review. That process could be, managed by staff at the environment department, but would provide input to the review board as well. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but.
And I think in the first few years, there may not be a ton of workload, but as we move on towards 2030, 2035, I mean, I would think it's going to get heavier and heavier, the load of these compliance plans.
Yeah. And I think, as we have more experience with them, there'll be opportunities if we need to revise, applications, revise the regulations if we need to. But yeah, the goal is to learn as we go.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Nelson. Board Member O'Malley.
Thank you.
Sorry, Diana was going to say something, but she was muted. Sorry to interrupt.
I'm
Please.
sorry. I don't know why my headphone is like muting me randomly. I just wanted to chime in and add that we are working or currently developing a system so that whenever we start accepting applications, I can present staff comments to the board and try to streamline or kind of highlight the necessities and some key takeaways during the application process, so it's a little bit more streamlined. And it's not just here's a massive packet for each application to the board members, so that hopefully it's a little bit of a time saver.
Much appreciated. Great. Thank you. Board Member O'Malley.
Yeah, and following on the last couple of questions and those comments, I guess I don't presume to speak for all the board members, but my concern is less about the board. It's more about making sure that you guys have the support you need, because I think there will absolutely be an influx. I know I've been stopped by countless people, some of whom I know that I am on the board, others know my involvement with passing the ordinance several years ago. One of the number one questions I get is, what's the difference between an ICS and an HCP? And I think I've got the party line down pretty well, and that was a great primer. But I'm hearing that from a lot of folks. So I guess I'm curious, are you hearing from a lot of developers and building owners now that are trying to prepare to do the right thing? Is that, it's not an exact science, but is that an indicator of what we should expect in terms of number of folks who will be applying for either the individual compliance schedule or the HCP?
So I would say we do get some inquiries to the retrofit resource hub. I would expect, though, that's not indicative of the number of applications, because I think a lot of large building owners that, have staff that can work on these issues are analyzing these issues internally and don't need to reach out to us for a full analysis. They might have a clarifying email here or there. And they participate in these types of meetings to ask questions. So I don't think we have a good plan that way. I would mention, I think we discussed at the last meeting that we are kind of building out the BERDO staff as well, so that we do have additional capacity.
Good. And I think, though, I think that's good to hear. I think your point is spot on. Some of the larger developers would have some in-house expertise and certainly a better understanding. I do think it's worth repeating, in the public forum, that there are still a lot of building owners who I don't think are aware of what will soon be before them. So, and that's on all of us to do what we can, to continue to do what we can. So I appreciate that. I guess my last question is the slide that mentioned the termination of an HCP would have to be done in the September of the prior year, and it would be the building owner would alert the board, or the board would alert the building owner. What's a scenario where a building owner would voluntarily divorce themselves from an HCP?
I mean, it could be if there's a change in circumstances or characteristics that the hardship is over, or for example, like a building permit has been issued that they were waiting for. You know, if it was a short-term hardship plan, we've suggested if, you wouldn't need to make that change if it's 18 months left. But there could be other hardships where you expected it to last for 10 years and technology changed or the price of RECs went down, you had access to a PPA, that the hardship just isn't there. And because hardship plans need to be reviewed every 5 years, it could just be that if your circumstances and characteristics have changed and you no longer have a hardship, you would terminate the hardship compliance plan.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think we can all hopefully correctly assume that as more and more renewables come online, the price of REC should become a lot more competitive and it should be a lot easier for some of these folks.
Right.
Sort of thing. Okay, very helpful. Tremendous job as always. Thank you, team.
All right. So just a reminder, we do have another section here with draft language on the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund coming up. And after that, board, we'll do another round of board member comment question, and then public members that are with us, we'll invite you obviously to also ask questions and comments on both of these sections, whether it's the hardship compliance plan or the Equitable Emission Investment Fund. So if it's okay, I'm going to have us just keep rolling because I think there's more content we need to get to. So let's jump ahead to the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund, please.
Thank you. And it's me again. Thank you for hanging on with all of this content. So to start, just a quick reminder of what the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund is. This is a new fund that will collect all alternative compliance payments or ACPs and penalties made to BERDO and invest them in local building carbon abatement projects. The ordinance requires that fund expenditures shall prioritize projects that benefit environmental justice communities, and the review board is responsible for evaluating project proposals, making expenditure recommendations, and setting conditions for expenditure. Next slide, please. Okay, the first set of draft language here is related to who is eligible to apply for funding and then the application process. So in terms of eligibility, we propose that any building owner or resident located in the city of Boston or an entity acting on their behalf is eligible to receive funding from the fund to evaluate, design, implement, support, and or administer projects that produce direct emissions reductions from energy use in buildings located in the city of Boston. For the application process, we propose that the review board shall hold at least one application cycle per calendar year and shall provide at least a 30-day period for interested parties to submit applications. The review board may, at its discretion, dedicate any application cycle to specific types of benefits or types of applicants that align with the goals of the fund and the ordinance. And applications shall include the following information and materials that I will read in the next slide. So for application contents, we propose first a description of the proposed project. This could include the buildings that will be served by the project and identifying if any of those buildings are covered by BERDO, the total cost of the project, and the realized or anticipated start date and the anticipated project completion date. We also propose, or obviously there will be, the application would consider or would include the applicant saying what would be the total amount of funding requested and a description of how that funding would be used for the project. Then the expected timeline and scale of emissions reductions, including from energy savings that would be achieved by the project. Remember that it is a requirement for all funded projects to have emissions reductions. And then there will also be a narrative of how the project would provide benefits to environmental justice populations or advance the purpose of the ordinance. Any anticipated efforts to inform and engage tenants in the proposed project, and if applicable, a description of any other funding or financial support that the proposed project has received in the past or that might be leveraged in the future. We're also proposing that the Environment Department shall review each application for both completeness and compliance with the eligibility criteria in the ordinance, and then the Environment Department would send all complete and eligible applications to the review board. Next slide, please. So the next set of regulations are related to funding decisions. So remember, the Environment Department would already send all the complete and eligible applications to the review board. And once they receive the applications, funding decisions would follow these rules. So first, the review board shall hold public hearings for all funding decisions. And for all decisions, the review board must first prioritize project proposals that provide direct benefits to environmental justice populations and populations disproportionately affected by air pollution, and then evaluate project proposals based on their expected impacts and benefits according to specific criteria that I will describe in the next slide. And finally, also to clarify if there are any insufficient project proposals that meet the requirements of the fund, funds may be held over for the next application cycle, provided that starting in 2026, any new monies may not sit in the fund for more than 5 years. Next slide, please. So here is a table that describes the different evaluation criteria that the review board would use to compare proposed projects. The first criteria is related to emissions reductions. Remember, this is a requirement of all projects that apply to the fund, but the review board may consider the timeline and scale of direct emissions reductions to compare projects, and they could use metrics such as the expected absolute emissions reductions or the expected emissions reductions achieved per dollar spent. We also have benefits to affordable housing and tenant protections. These would be related to the timeline and scale of direct benefits to low-income residents and residents of affordable housing. We have benefits to labor and workforce development, also the expected timeline and scale of benefits to local labor and workforce development. This could include equitable employment and contracting standards, living wage standards, and the hiring of, for example, local contractors, cooperative contractors, minority women and disadvantaged business enterprises, and trainees or recent graduates from local workforce development programs. We also have benefits to outdoor air quality, which would be the timeline and scale of direct emissions reduction of criteria air pollutants. We have benefits to indoor air quality and quality of life. This includes any improvements related to indoor air quality, thermal comfort, or reduced energy bills. We have climate resilience benefits, which would related to any benefits to heat resilience, energy resilience, or coastal and stormwater flood management. And finally, we have a category of other benefits so that the reviewer has, both the applicant and the reviewer have the opportunity to propose and evaluate other types of benefits. We propose that this could include the project's replicability, scalability, uniqueness, and urgency or timeliness. Next slide, please. Similar to what all topics I have presented, we have both standard conditions and special conditions. We propose that the reviewer would set standard conditions for all projects that receive funding. This could be related to, for example, timely compliance with reporting requirements in the ordinance. If the project is for BERDO buildings, the reporting of project progress and the use of funding, the completion of the funded project in the expected timeline, and that the reviewer may inspect the funded projects to and records to see if they are complying with any conditions. And then on a case-by-case basis, the reviewer would also be able to set special conditions relevant to the distribution of benefits to EJ communities and the advancements of the purpose of the ordinance, and those would be discussed at a public meeting as well. Next slide, please. And that was it. Just as a reminder, or I'm not sure if we mentioned it before, but all of these draft language was also presented at the last special hearing by the Air Pollution Control Commission And at that hearing, the APCC voted to open the first formal public comment period. So that comment period is currently open. It was public notice, and you can find it in the link in the slides. And Diana, if you can help me also send that on the chat. And this comment period will close on Friday, October 20th at 12 p.m. So that's a heads up. And I think I'm now happy to take questions by the board. Oh, I lied. There's still a few slides. Sorry.
Yeah, no, great. Claudio, yeah, let's do some of the proposed next steps, and then after
Yes.
that, we'll do comments and public comments too.
Yes, apologies for that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Diana.
Oh, I was just say quickly, I can review some proposed next
Yes.
steps.
Sorry.
So for remaining topics, hardship compliance plans and the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So as Claudia mentioned, there is a formal comment period currently open. The BERDO team will receive those comments and feedback and revise the regulations draft language, and then present those at the following Air Pollution Control Commission hearing. And for fines and enforcement, we are developing those straw proposals. And we plan to continue the same pattern that we've been doing. So an informal comment period for the straw proposals and then draft language following that. And as always, here's our visual tentative timeline for hardship compliance plans and the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. And we're hoping to have these wrapped up by the end of the year. So by the end of December.
Excellent. All right, thanks again. Amazing work on all of this, Claudia and team, and thanks, Diana, just for helping outline the next steps. All right, we're going to do another round of questions and comments from the board, and then there are a few members of the public that are still with us. Thanks for hanging in there. We will have a chance if you have any questions or comments as well. So, members of the board, I'll go backwards again, reverse. Board member O'Malley, any just questions or comments from you?
No questions. Quick comment. Again, job well done. I think when it comes to the Equitable Investment Fund, we want to have some clear guidelines, which we have and will continue to tease out. We also want to allow the board to have some flexibility, which is also enshrined in some of this draft language. So I think you've nodded that or whatever, threaded that needle quite well. So well done. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Board Member O'Malley. Board Member Nelson.
So in reviewing these potential projects that will seek funds, will the environmental department or the review board review the technical merits of the proposed projects? And is there a requirement that these projects be bid? How do we evaluate pricing as well as the technical merits?
A great question. There is currently no requirement for bidding projects. I think that we'll see potentially a large range of projects. So if we're seeing smaller projects, that affect, say, a multifamily building, that's not necessarily a situation with a bid. If it was a very large project, then a question for an applicant might be, did you get more than one bid? So there's going to be flexibility to ask for additional questions. And as we work on applications, we might want to think about whether we flag that type of question for scale of projects. So we're welcome to feedback when we get to that part of the process. But I think we'll need to have, as Board Member O'Malley was just saying, kind of the flexibility to treat different scale projects differently. That's a great point. And I think also for projects in terms of measuring their technical viability, again, that may differ if the application for something that's kind of tried and true versus somebody that's trying to demonstrate a novel technology. And that will be kind of at the review board's discretion if that's something they think makes sense to use the fund for.
Right.
And could have more discussion then of why an applicant thinks it's a viable project.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Board Member Nelson. I had some similar thoughts. This is, I know we don't know how much we're really going to have in this fund, really, and I'm just thinking about like the the organizations that ended up creating funds around COVID and how much work and energy and attention that took to distribute and, you know, do that in a way that's fair and principled and like rooted in a set of like, strong sort of standards, right? That I think, again, this is a great shot at doing that. So, but there is a lot to that whole process, and it makes me want to draw back on some of those efforts, right? That I think did a really good job of getting resources out timely, doing it in a way that was fair and transparent, and does make me think back to a question maybe that you asked, I believe, Councilor O'Malley earlier regarding the compliance plans. It is like about staffing and just like, how do we, when this gets rolling, right? How do we make sure that there's the proper support in place to work with the board to get this all taken care of? And I just know that from the organizations that I know that took on work like this, again, it was a little different, but created funds that they were administering millions of dollars, and it sucked out like so much attention that they were not able to focus on other programmatic, their central primary programmatic functions, right? And so I'm just flagging that as something that again, different context, maybe different amount of money we're talking about. I'm not sure, but it's just a cautionary kind of thing in my mind that makes me want to look at this closer. But I really appreciate all the work that went into it. Just more of a comment.
Yeah, and I think, if I may, just a small observation there to consider down the road, that the review board will be able to set schedules for when, applications would be due and when they would review them. And so once we get the schedule of applications for various forms of relief under the review board, right, we might want to have the fund applications be not anywhere near September 1st, since that's a deadline for many other form applications.
That's
so
right.
It's one tool, but I do appreciate your point.
All right, thank you. Board Member Jacobs.
Sorry, I'm here. Yeah, I don't have any questions. I decided to hit the button. Sorry about that.
All good. Let's go to Board Member Ellis.
Yes, thank you. Just out of curiosity, based on what you just mentioned, Aladdin, I just want to express it might be helpful to see some type of like a visual infographics that shows, this thing is the starting date for the application, this thing is the deadline, and sort of like list all of them like for a plan, a Hardship compliance plan, an application for the emissions investment fund, and so on and so forth. So it may be helpful to just visualize that for us so that we can be able to tell you, ooh, this might be a lot for not just us, but the staff members as well. So I just wanted to put that out there. That's my first thing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you, because on our to-do list is doing that from the building owner's perspective as well. So we'll be sure to add this in terms of also for them how to combine different relief measures and what that time frame could look like. So yeah, thank you. We'll add that.
Not a problem. Please forgive me. I want to go back a second because my mind works a little bit slower when it comes to all that content from the hardship compliance plan. I just wanted to clarify the section that had mentioned that review board at its discretion can secure outside consultants, engineers, and other aid to review those HCP. What is our guidance? I'm like, is that supposed to be an RFP process, number one, or are we going based on the list of qualified energy professionals that I believe that the city had put on their website? I guess I'm just wondering, like, what is the normal process? Forgive me, I'm not familiar with it.
No, it's a great question, something that we need to flesh out for this review board. So we do have a similar program for the Conservation Commission when they look at applications for large wetlands impact projects. So we will look to that for guidance and come back to you with more ideas on that.
All right, not a problem. That's it for me for right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Ellis. Board Member Boyd.
No, but I just want to say that the staff done a great job, and I'm glad to see tenant protections in there, because that's very important to me, and I'm sure to tenants. So I'm glad to see that. And great job, everyone.
Right. Any last comments or questions from members of the board? And if not, I'm gonna open up the public comment period. Okay. Let's do that. So we give those of you that hung in there. I see your hand up, Wheezy. I'm just going to read this just because I should, and then we'll let you go ahead. So we're going to open the meeting to public comment. As a reminder, members of the public, to provide public comment, raise your hand like you've done, Wheezy, or you can also use the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and can't use it, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 or send your questions to staff via email, berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. Wheezy, I'm just going to go ahead and pass it to you.
Thank you. And I want to thank both the board members and the staff for all of this work, putting everything into the form it's in now. And I only want to make one comment, which is that it would be really great if in writing these regulations, the current structures don't just get brought into the future as they are now. So for example, using the mechanisms for selecting contractors or bidding that's in place now, because a lot of what's in place now is discriminatory and embeds structures of exclusion. And so this is a tremendous opportunity to not just bring those structures of inclusion into the future, but to really think about how do we make sure that all of the BIPOC people who are working hard to get the climate skills for the future work that needs to be done have these opportunities going forward, instead of being excluded for some reason that they weren't already on a list. So just to keep in mind that a lot of the systems that are in place now are not the most inclusive. And so using that filter as you're thinking about any changes going forward.
Thanks for that comment, Wheezy. Appreciate it. Any other members of the public want to offer questions or comments? Okay. If not, I think we are ready to move to our next agenda item, administrative updates. So I'm going to pass it to you, Diana.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Working? Okay, great. Yes, I have several administrative updates. The first one actually pretty related to what we've been talking about. I'm happy to share that in addition to the 2 BERDO positions that Aiden mentioned in our last meeting, we have approval for another BERDO position, a BERDO review board assistant, who will be helping with the review board specifically. Being hands-on, so it'll be myself and an additional person, staff person, and hopefully will lighten some of that load, especially as we start accepting applications. Another administrative announcement, the Air Pollution Control Commission has added a new commissioner. So I wanted to share here, Commissioner Paul Chan has joined the APCC. He has served formerly as the Director of Development at the Massachusetts Housing Investment Corporation. I believe is also teaches from time to time at Boston University, and has served on a number of municipal boards in the past. So just wanted to share that as with the BERDO Review Board. And then finally, our next meeting is scheduled for October 23rd. I know 2 weeks from now would be the 16th, but this keeps us to 2 meetings a month, which I think is our general beat. So we'll actually meet again in 3 weeks. And that's it from my end, unless there are any other comments or questions that folks may have, but that's it.
Great. Just any reactions or comments from board members about that? Thanks, Dan. I think that makes sense to keep us on the 2 meetings a month. Yeah, thanks for the other information. Any other just questions or comments from staff or board members? Okay. Wheezy, do you have your hand up from before? Is that what I'm seeing, or did you raise it?
No, just a very quick comment, Lee, at the right time.
Okay, I think this is probably the right time because once we do that, we're going to move to adjourning the meeting. So why don't you jump in now?
Thank you. I know the word labor was used in the creation of the list of criteria to use. I want to say that I'm hoping that labor doesn't just mean unionized, but not all the community contractors who are not unionized. I'm assuming it means it's more broadly, meaning anyone who's working. But I just wanted, just in case, I just wanted that said out loud. And I want to echo Board Member Boyd's comment on the tenant protection. I'm appreciative of that.
Okay. So if there's nothing else, I think we can move now to our meeting adjournment. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Is there a second?
Second?
Board Member Nelson, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. The meeting is adjourned at 6:04 p.m. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a few weeks. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Nice
Bye,
job.
everybody.
Have a good night. Thank you.